Amina had always been the devoted wife and mother, but beneath the surface, a quiet desperation was slowly consuming her. When she met Dr. Hassan, the charming family doctor, she found in him the attention and validation she had been craving. What started as innocent medical visits quickly spiraled into an affair that would threaten to shatter everything Amina had worked for. Her secret meetings with Dr. Hassan were thrilling, but as the lies piled up, the weight of betrayal became impossible to bear. Now, Amina had to face the consequences of her actions and the devastating truth that her world was about to crumble. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the Ahmed family was known for their seemingly perfect life. Khalid, a dedicated accountant, had worked his way up in a stable company, providing a comfortable life for his family. His wife, Amina, was the picture of grace and devotion. She had given up her career after their first child was born, choosing to be a stay-at-home mother. Over the years, she had found fulfillment in raising their 3 children and maintaining their home, all while embodying the values of their Muslim faith. The family was admired by their friends and neighbors for their close-knit dynamic, their children's good behavior, and their commitment to their community. Amina had always been the heart of the household, putting everyone's needs before her own. She was known for her kind smile and warm nature, often seen helping other mothers with their children or volunteering at local events. Her beauty was evident, but it was her personality that truly shone. People admired her strength, her ability to juggle her responsibilities without complaint. She was a loving wife, a dedicated mother, and a woman of faith, always looking out for her family, always doing what was expected of her. But beneath the surface, Amina was beginning to feel trapped. Khalid, her husband, was a good man, but his focus had shifted. He was always busy with work, sometimes coming home late at night or spending weekends away on business trips. When he was home, he was tired, often retreating into his study to handle emails or financial reports. Amina, left with the day-to-day tasks of running the household and raising their children, began to feel increasingly isolated. There were no shared moments of joy between her and Khalid, no quiet talks or affectionate gestures. The gap between them grew slowly but steadily, and Amina began to wonder if things would ever be the same. The house had become quieter over the years. The children, now older, had their own activities and friends, and Khalid's work consumed his attention. The loneliness Amina had felt in the early days of marriage had returned, but now it was more intense. She longed for someone to talk to, someone who could listen to her without judgment. She wasn't looking for attention, but for a connection, a reminder that she was still a person beyond her roles as a wife and mother. It was during one of her routine health checkups that Amina first met Dr. Hassan, the family doctor. Khalid had always been the one to schedule the appointments for the family, and it was Dr. Hassan who had treated their children, and even Khalid when needed. However, Amina had never been to him personally for any serious health issues. That day, her appointment was a simple follow-up for her annual physical, but it would mark the beginning of something that would change everything. Dr. Hassan was a man in his mid-40s with a calm, reassuring demeanor. He had a way of making patients feel comfortable, and his gentle smile immediately put Amina at ease. Their conversation was polite and professional at first, nothing more than a typical doctor-patient interaction. However, Dr. Hassan's attentiveness to Amina's well-being and his thoughtful questions about her emotional health struck a chord with her. He wasn't just focused on her physical condition, he genuinely seemed interested in how she was doing emotionally. Amina hadn't realized how much she longed for someone to ask her that simple question, "How are you? How have you been?" She found herself looking forward to their next appointment, not because she had any health concerns, but because she craved the attention and connection that Dr. Hassan had offered. Her thoughts began to drift toward him more frequently, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their brief conversations had made her feel more alive than she had in years. Unbeknownst to Khalid, Amina's heart was already beginning to drift toward a man who was providing her with something she hadn't even realized she was missing: emotional connection. As the weeks passed, Amina made more frequent visits to Dr. Hassan's clinic. Each time, the conversations felt easier, and Amina found herself talking about her frustrations with her marriage, her sense of isolation, and the emptiness she often felt. Dr. Hassan listened patiently, offering kind words of support, and Amina began to feel a deep sense of appreciation for him. She wasn't looking for romance, not at first, but the way he made her feel heard, understood, and valued was something she hadn't experienced in years. What started as innocent conversations would slowly turn into something much more dangerous, though neither of them realized it at the time. Over the next few months, Amina's visits to Dr. Hassan became more frequent. What had begun as a simple checkup quickly transformed into an excuse for Amina to step outside the confines of her daily life. The small interactions during her appointments grew longer, and before she knew it, Amina was looking forward to each encounter with a sense of anticipation that she hadn't felt in a long time. She began to confide in Dr. Hassan more deeply, telling him about her frustrations with Khalid, her sense of disconnection, and the growing loneliness that had taken hold of her. His responses were always thoughtful and understanding, his voice calm and reassuring, making Amina feel seen in ways that she hadn't felt for years. Dr. Hassan was always a professional, at least on the surface. He maintained a friendly yet distant demeanor during their conversations, never overstepping any boundaries, but there was a warmth to his presence that Amina couldn't ignore. He made her feel as though she mattered. His kind words provided her with an emotional comfort that she had been craving for a long time. He would listen attentively, offering gentle advice about how she could reconnect with her husband or suggesting small changes in her routine that might alleviate some of the stress she was feeling. It wasn't long before Amina began to feel like Dr. Hassan was the only person who truly understood her. In their conversations, there was always a subtle undercurrent of something more. Amina found herself laughing a little more than usual, her heart fluttering with the way he looked at her, his deep eyes locking onto hers for just a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't flirtation, at least not overtly, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them that seemed to grow with each passing day. She knew she shouldn't feel this way, especially toward someone like Dr. Hassan, but she couldn't help it. He was kind, attentive, and made her feel special in a way that Khalid hadn't in years. The more Amina spent time with him, the more she found herself drawn to him in a way that made her feel both alive and guilty at the same time. She began to look for reasons to visit his clinic outside of her scheduled appointments. Minor health complaints, a headache here, a backache there became convenient excuses to see him. She knew Khalid wouldn't think twice about it. He trusted the doctor and assumed that everything was fine. But Amina's motivations for visiting Dr. Hassan were no longer purely medical. She needed to feel the comfort of his presence, even if it was only for a few minutes. During one of these visits, Dr. Hassan offered her a small compliment, something simple but meaningful. "You have a way of carrying yourself, Amina. It's rare to meet someone so full of grace." His words, though kind, sent a surge of warmth through her chest. She smiled, slightly embarrassed but grateful. She hadn't realized how much she had missed being seen, truly seen, by someone. That compliment lingered with Amina long after she left the clinic. She couldn't stop thinking about it. In her quiet moments, she found herself replaying the encounter, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was just a passing comment, but it felt like a spark had ignited in her. Amina knew she was treading dangerous waters. She was a married woman, a mother, and a devoted wife. She wasn't looking for an affair, or so she told herself. But the connection she felt with Dr. Hassan was undeniable. Every time they met, she felt a growing pull, as if something inside her was waking up, something she had buried for years. She found herself questioning her marriage, wondering if Khalid had ever truly seen her the way Dr. Hassan did. The guilt was there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it was always overshadowed by the need to feel valued, to feel alive. And yet, Amina didn't want to hurt Khalid. She loved him, or at least she used to. She didn't know what had happened to them, why they had drifted so far apart. But she wasn't ready to face the truth, not yet. She couldn't bear the thought of losing everything she had built with him and the children. Still, she couldn't deny the growing connection between herself and Dr. Hassan. Every time she saw him, she felt like she was walking a fine line between something she longed for and something she knew she shouldn't have. What began as innocent visits for health checkups had now become a dangerous game, a game Amina wasn't sure she could stop playing. As the weeks turned into months, the relationship between Amina and Dr. Hassan deepened in a way that neither of them had anticipated. What had started as casual conversations during routine medical visits had evolved into a bond neither of them could ignore. Amina found herself thinking about Dr. Hassan at all hours of the day, longing for their next encounter. Every interaction left her feeling a mixture of exhilaration and guilt, but the thrill of their secret connection was too powerful to resist. Amina had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control over her emotions, but with Dr. Hassan, that control was slipping away. Each time they spoke, she felt an emotional pull that she couldn't explain. He was always so attentive, so empathetic, as if he could see right through her. He paid attention to her words in a way Khalid no longer did. She had never realized how starved she had been for that kind of attention. As her visits to Dr. Hassan's clinic grew more frequent, Amina began to tell Khalid less and less about her whereabouts. She would tell him she was running errands or attending women's gatherings at the mosque, leaving out the fact that she was sneaking away to see the doctor. At first, Khalid didn't think much of it. He had his own busy schedule, and Amina seemed to be handling everything at home. He trusted her completely, never suspecting that there was anything going on behind the scenes. The secrecy was intoxicating for Amina. The thrill of sneaking around behind Khalid's back, the illicitness of it all, made her feel like a different person. She had become someone new, a woman who was desired, a woman who had the power to captivate someone. The mundane routine of her life had been replaced with something exciting, something that made her feel seen, heard, and valued. Dr. Hassan had become more than just a doctor to her. He was a source of validation, a refuge from her increasingly distant marriage. Their conversations became more intimate, crossing boundaries that Amina had never expected. They would talk about their deepest desires, their regrets, and even their fantasies. Dr. Hassan, always the gentleman, never pressured her, but Amina could sense that his feelings for her were growing. He would brush his fingers lightly against hers as he passed her a medical form or hand her a glass of water. His touches were fleeting, but they sent shivers down her spine. She had never felt this kind of attention from anyone, let alone a man outside her marriage. Amina tried to reassure herself that it was harmless. She convinced herself that she wasn't doing anything wrong, that she was simply seeking the emotional connection that had been missing from her life for so long. But deep down, she knew she was crossing a line. The affair, though it had not yet moved beyond emotional intimacy, was slowly consuming her. She couldn't help but feel an undeniable attraction toward Dr. Hassan, and it was becoming harder to ignore the magnetic pull between them. One afternoon, after a particularly long and intimate conversation, Dr. Hassan suggested they take a walk together in the nearby park. It was a simple request, but to Amina, it felt like a moment of significance. She hesitated for a moment, torn between the life she had built and the temptation that Dr. Hassan represented. But something inside her urged her to go, to experience the thrill of being with someone who made her feel desired. She agreed, and they met outside his clinic an hour later. Walking through the park, Dr. Hassan gently guided their conversation toward more personal topics. He spoke about his own past, his regrets, and his disappointments in relationships. Amina listened intently, grateful for the vulnerability he shared. It felt like they were opening up to each other in ways she had never done with Khalid. She realized how much she craved that depth of connection, how much she longed for someone to truly understand her. As they walked along a quiet path, Dr. Hassan stopped suddenly, turning to face her. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. The tension between them was palpable. Amina's heart raced as she realized that this moment could change everything. She had already crossed so many boundaries, but now, standing there in the park with Dr. Hassan, she was teetering on the edge of something much bigger, something that could destroy the life she had carefully built. But before anything could happen, Amina's phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of the moment. It was a message from Khalid, asking if she was coming home soon. The reality of her situation rushed back to her, and she quickly made an excuse to leave. She thanked Dr. Hassan for the walk and hurriedly made her way back to the car. Her heart was still pounding, but guilt had replaced the excitement. As she drove home, she realized how close she had come to making an irreversible decision. She didn't know what she wanted anymore, but she knew that what had started as a harmless friendship was no longer harmless. Amina was in too deep, and the consequences of her actions were beginning to take shape. As the days passed, the weight of the secret affair grew heavier on Amina's shoulders. She could no longer deny the toll it was taking on her emotionally, physically, and mentally. The connection with Dr. Hassan had deepened, but so had her sense of guilt. Every moment with him was filled with a mix of exhilaration and dread, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. The thought of returning to the life she had with Khalid, the long, empty evenings and the quiet routine, felt suffocating. It was a crisp, chilly evening when the situation took a turn. Amina had been preparing dinner for Khalid and the children when her phone buzzed. It was Dr. Hassan, texting her in his usual nonchalant manner, "Are you free tonight? I need to see you." Amina's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was asking. They had been playing with fire for months, and now it felt like the heat had finally caught up with them. The text made her feel both alive and terrified. She quickly responded, agreeing to meet him later. She told Khalid that she was going to pick up a few things from the store, and he, as usual, didn't think twice about it. When she arrived at the small hotel just outside the city, her heart raced. She walked into the lobby, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had never felt so conflicted in her life, yet the pull toward Dr. Hassan was undeniable. As she walked down the hallway to the room he had reserved, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had never been in a situation like this before, never imagined she would be sneaking around behind her husband's back, meeting a man she wasn't supposed to want. But here she was, each step bringing her closer to an inevitable decision. Dr. Hassan greeted her at the door with a smile that seemed too knowing. His warm embrace was comforting, but the thrill of the situation was starting to feel like something more dangerous now. They exchanged a few words, but the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Amina could sense that Dr. Hassan, too, felt the shift. What had once been a flirtatious, playful connection was now serious, too serious to walk away from. He led her to the small sitting area, where they both sat in silence for a few moments. It was as if neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between their unspoken feelings and the reality of their situation. Amina knew she was about to cross a line, but her desire to be wanted to feel seen, desired, and alive was overpowering. They spoke briefly about their lives, their frustrations, but this time their words carried more weight. There was an intensity to the way Dr. Hassan looked at her, and Amina couldn't look away. Just then, Amina's phone buzzed again. It was Khalid asking where she was. Her heart dropped. She quickly glanced at the message, then back at Dr. Hassan, who had clearly seen the shift in her expression. Amina's body tensed, and for the first time she felt a surge of fear. Khalid's text wasn't a casual inquiry, it was a demand for her to return home. Something in his tone told her that he knew something wasn't right. Her pulse quickened as she realized she had pushed things too far. The moment of reckoning had arrived. In that instant, everything changed. Amina stood up abruptly, her mind racing. She could feel her entire world crumbling around her. She had been living in denial, convincing herself that she could keep the two worlds separate. But now, the walls were closing in. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't anticipated the emotional toll it would take. The guilt, the fear, and the thrill had all collided at once, creating a chaotic storm inside her. Dr. Hassan, sensing her panic, reached out to her, but Amina pulled away, her hands trembling. She couldn't look at him anymore. She couldn't reconcile the man who had made her feel valued with the man who had lured her into something she couldn't control. The weight of her betrayal was suffocating. She excused herself, quickly gathering her things and rushing out of the room. She didn't look back as she walked to her car, her thoughts spiraling out of control. The drive home was a blur. Her mind kept replaying Khalid's message, the way his voice had sounded when they had last spoken. She wasn't ready to face him. She wasn't ready to confront the truth of what she had done. And yet, there was no escaping it. She was in too deep. When she finally arrived home, the silence was deafening. Khalid was sitting in the living room, his eyes tired but sharp. He didn't say anything at first, but Amina could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. The reality of what she had done was finally hitting her. There was no turning back from the choices she had made. In that moment, Amina knew her world had shifted irreparably. The secret she had been keeping, the affair that had once felt like a fleeting escape, had turned into something much darker. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. The tragic part was that she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the charade. The consequences of her actions were coming for her, and she wasn't prepared for the fallout. The days following that fateful night at the hotel felt like a blur to Amina. She had barely slept, her mind constantly replaying the moment she had stepped into the living room to face Khalid. The guilt gnawed at her, and every time she looked at him, her stomach twisted. Khalid, ever the dutiful husband, had sensed something was off, but he said nothing. He was quiet in the days that followed, withdrawn, as if he was waiting for Amina to reveal what was happening. His silence was suffocating, and Amina found herself living in a constant state of dread, wondering if he knew. She tried to push the nagging guilt to the back of her mind, but it wouldn't go away. Each time she looked at Khalid's tired face, the sense of betrayal became more unbearable. It was like a heavy weight that she couldn't shake, pulling her deeper into a sense of dread. She had lied to him repeatedly, and for the first time, the emotional distance she had felt between them seemed impossible to ignore. Their marriage, once strong and filled with shared memories, now felt fragile and broken. Amina wasn't sure if it could survive the secret she had been hiding, let alone the truth of her feelings for Dr. Hassan. Dr. Hassan had texted her several times after their last meeting, but Amina ignored his messages. She didn't know how to face him anymore. She had been caught up in the whirlwind of emotions he had awakened in her, but now she could see the damage it had caused. The temporary escape had turned into a dangerous game, and she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The excitement of being desired, the thrill of the affair, had dulled. All that remained was the stark reality of her actions. She had destroyed something precious, a marriage, a family on a whim, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. But the worst part was the realization that she hadn't been honest with herself. She had thought the affair was a way to find fulfillment, to escape her loneliness. But now, in the silence of her own home, she understood that the void she had been trying to fill could never be satisfied by anyone else. She had been looking for love and validation from someone outside her marriage, but the truth was that the only person who could heal the rift between her and Khalid was herself. One evening, after weeks of pretending everything was fine, Amina could no longer bear the weight of the lie. She found herself standing in the kitchen, staring at the stove, when Khalid entered the room. He didn't say anything at first, but she could feel his presence behind her. His eyes were filled with a quiet intensity, as if he had been waiting for her to come to him. Amina turned to face him, her voice trembling as she spoke. She couldn't keep the secret any longer. She had to come clean. Khalid needed to know the truth about everything. He needed to understand why she had been distant, why she had shut him out. She had betrayed him in the worst way, and though she wasn't sure if he could ever forgive her, she owed him that much. With a deep breath, Amina began to tell Khalid everything. She spoke of her loneliness, her struggles with their marriage, and how she had found comfort in Dr. Hassan's attention. She told him how the relationship had spiraled into something more, how she had crossed boundaries that she could never undo. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but as the words spilled out, Amina felt a small sense of relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't hiding anything. Khalid stood still, his face unreadable. His eyes were dark, his expression cold. When she finished, the silence between them was deafening. Amina couldn't bear to look at him, but she knew she had to. Slowly he spoke, his voice low and steady. He didn't shout, didn't cry, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing the truth from her lips was like a crushing blow. "I trusted you," Khalid said quietly. "And you betrayed that trust. You betrayed me." The weight of his words hit Amina like a slap to the face. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. There was no excuse for what she had done, no justification that could make it right. She had destroyed the trust they had built over the years, and now it seemed like everything was slipping through her fingers. Khalid didn't ask her for details about the affair, didn't demand to know everything. Instead, he asked one simple question: why? Amina didn't have an answer. How could she explain the deep ache she had felt inside, the need for someone to notice her, to see her for who she truly was? But even as she struggled to find the words, she realized something: it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and nothing could undo it. She had broken the most sacred bond of trust. The days that followed were filled with tension and sorrow. Khalid withdrew into himself, spending more time at work, leaving Amina alone with her thoughts. She knew that their marriage was hanging by a thread, but she also knew that she couldn't undo what she had done. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Amina wasn't sure what the future held. The affair with Dr. Hassan had destroyed her marriage, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had nearly destroyed. The affair had offered her a temporary escape, but it had ultimately led to a painful truth: the person she had been running from all along was herself. And now there was no one left to blame but her.